The objective here is to morph, not to mask. Now, by that we simply mean, and I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but we tend to mask the traits of Asperger syndrome because, well, we just don't seem to fit in, and we want to fit in, and so we start masking. We pretend to be somebody that we're not. But what if we could make some subtle adjustments? So the masking is not so necessary. Now, I got to clarify here right from the beginning, I've got no problem with having Asperger syndrome. In fact, I like having Asperger syndrome, and I don't really want it to go away, but I do want to maximize my function ability because, well, for a million reasons. Number one, just to be more successful in life. Number two is a courtesy to other people. Number three is just to be happier, to remove some of those obstacles and frustrations that we often encounter just because we are Aspies. All right, we've got a few things for you here, and let's just take a look at number one. I see a few, we've got 7. Number one is this. Are you ready? Imagine the ideal you and become that person. Now that may seem a little when I say that, even as I say it, it sounds kind of confusing. So let's just let's drill down on this for a second because I think this is really important. So stop and think for a second. If you could be the ideal person, what changes would you make to you? Now, there's some changes that you just can't make because, well, some things are just immutable. They're unchangeable. For example, you say, well, the ideal me would be 2 inches taller. Well, that's not going to happen. Your height is immutable unless you're a young person and you're still growing. Or you could say, I'd like to have an IQ about, 20 points higher. Well, while we're at it, let's make it 50 points higher. Well, that's not going to happen either. Your intelligence is largely immutable. I mean, you've got a little wiggle room, but not very much. But on the other hand, there are some things that you can change, like your weight, like your presentation. You know, I heard one guy say that we talk about curb appeal with a house. Homes, when you sell them, they have a curb appeal. And he said, you know, people have the same thing, curb appeal. Only you're not standing on a curb, you're just out in public, wherever you happen to be. In other words, there are some changes you can make that make yourself more appealing. All right, so let's stop and think about what some of those things are. You know, the way that you handle yourself, your manner of dress, the way that you speak, you can enhance your personal curb appeal. So that's what we're talking about. So let's imagine what person, the ideal person we would be if we would just do it. Again, not talking about immutables, things that we can't change, but things that we actually can change. You know, lose weight, gain weight, maybe get in better shape, maybe work a little bit on our lifestyle. If there's some habit in our life that is harmful, something that we can reduce or just get rid of it altogether. So the first thing we need to do, in my opinion, is to imagine the ideal you and then work towards becoming that person. And the way that we do that is, first of all, we set an end goal. You know, we just define it. Get out a piece of paper or get out a notepad on your computer, just type down some things or write down some things. This is my ideal weight. This is the way that I want to handle myself. This is the outcome. It's kind of like planning a trip. You know, you plan the end destination, then you need to figure out how to get there. So figure out how to get there. You know, what do you need to do to change your diet if you want to lose weight or gain weight? If you want to be a little bit stronger, what do you have to do? Do you have to walk a mile or two every day? Do you have to do some workout? Put those things down. All right, so once again, the objective is not to mask your Asperger syndrome, but it's to morph into a better person. Let's get this thing out of our heads that because we are Aspies, that we're just stuck in a rut. And we're just predestined to be what we are, and there's nothing we can do about it. Let's also get this thing out of our head that there's something flawed or negative about being a person with Asperger syndrome. Neither of those things are true. Just like neurotypical people, there's always room for improvement. We're not an exception, so why do we pretend that we are? Number two is this: practice speaking with confidence. That's a relatively easy thing for Aspies to do because you're alone in your car, or maybe you're alone at home, nobody around. Who's going to hear you? So go ahead and practice. Not going to hurt you. But when you're not? What about when you're not alone? Now this is when I like to practice. When I'm out and about. And I know it runs against the grain of having Asperger syndrome because we just do not like to socialize. It's taxing on us. It's exhausting sometimes. And we just, causes anxiety. But we just have an affinity against socializing. We just don't like to do it. It's very uncomfortable. But that's changeable. That's not immutable. There are some things we can do. And what I like to do, speaking of practicing speaking, is when I'm out and about, I like to practice speaking to strangers. That's difficult to do, isn't it? You're saying, nah, I'm not going to do that. No, why not? They're strangers. What if you say the wrong thing? What if it doesn't sound right? So what? You're not going to see them again. It's not going to hurt anything. And so what if they are people that you know? They already know that you have Asperger syndrome. They probably think you're a little weird anyhow, so go ahead and just, okay, I'm going to be a little weird. Talk to them. But the more you talk, the more you practice, the better you get. So number two is practice speaking with confidence. Number three is this: consider every opportunity, or every encounter rather, an opportunity. That's kind of repeating what I just said, because every time you encounter somebody, every single time you encounter somebody, that's an opportunity to practice, without exception. I can't think of an exception. You could be in an accident, they throw you in the back of an ambulance, and you're surrounded by people who are trying to take care of you. Okay, you got an opportunity to talk to people. That's really a bad example, isn't it? Okay, let's say that I like to go to the grocery store once a week and buy groceries, so that's what I think of. So let's go to the grocery store. So you're walking down the aisle, you see a perfect stranger, you say hello. I mean, is that really hard? Yeah, it can be hard for a person with Asperger syndrome because you speak and it just doesn't come out right. So here's what I do. I think. I stop and I pause and I think before I speak, and that is number four. Number four is speak with pause. Now, that doesn't mean that you just pause before you speak and think about what you're going to say. And in your mind, you take those few seconds before you encounter somebody in practice, but it also means this: as you are speaking, learn to breathe, practice this, breathe and talk slow. There are some very good reasons for doing that, because people who talk slowly, and I don't mean real slow, but I mean with a tolerable, what would you call that? When you're walking, you'd call it a gait. I don't know what you call it when you're talking, but anyhow, just not talking fast or overly slow, just talking normal. Because when people talk fast or do things fast, it betrays fear in them. So if you want to project confidence, slow down. People who are confident and self-assured, they don't care what you think. And so they speak slowly, distinctly, on purpose, purposefully, and they project confidence. So you got to practice that. But try to pause when you're talking. I remember growing up in my parents used to make me go to church every Sunday. Actually, we went twice on Sunday. And I sat through, as a kid, I don't know, hundreds of sermons, I suppose. And I would hear hundreds of sermons. But do you know how many I listened to? Probably none of them. I mean, sometimes we'd have a special speaker come in who was particularly talented, and you couldn't help but listen to the guy. But by and large, most of the sermons I sat through were daydream opportunities. And I grew up at a time when air conditioning in public buildings was very rare. And the church we went to was typical of all churches. They didn't have air conditioning. It just wasn't something people did. So you go to church and they have these little fans. I don't know if you remember these or not, but little handheld paper fans that were given free by the funeral homes. And it had an advertisement for the funeral home on the fan. And everybody would sit there and fan themselves in the summertime. To me, that was kind of morbid, but, you know, you're in church, and they seem to be obsessed with death. So I guess, you know, gonna die, go to heaven, stop by the funeral home on your way. So they got their phone number on it, free advertising, whatever. But the point is, I would sit there and hear hundreds of sermons, but I didn't listen to hardly any of them. However, there were times when I had to listen, and that is when somebody would be up speaking, and to me it was just background noise. But then the speaker would pause for some reason. You didn't know why. Maybe he's got a cough. Maybe something has choked him up emotionally and he's pausing to cry or pretend to cry. Some of them do that. But when they do that, they get your attention. Try that sometime when you're talking to somebody, even one-on-one. Just stop mid-sentence and look like you're thinking. And you know what? It gets attention. But the whole point of this is, number 4, is to speak with pause. That is to speak slowly, distinctly, and if you need to, even pause while you're talking. Practice. Again, remember number 3, every encounter is an opportunity to practice. Take advantage of it. I mean, you don't have to talk to everybody every time, but, you know, once in a while, you can go ahead and say, hey, how you doing? See if they freak out on you. Say, man, this guy's weird. Let's get away from him. Cool. That's fun. Let's do it again. Number 5 is basically something very similar, and that is take your time, but not only when you are speaking, but take your time when you are doing anything. And this kind of goes back to what we mentioned earlier, but you know, people who are in control take their time. They're not in a big hurry. Why should they be? They don't have to be. It's their thing. They can go fast, they go slow, they can do whatever they want to do if they are in control of the situation. So flip that backwards. When somebody takes their time, and I don't mean being obnoxiously slow on purpose just to annoy people, but I mean just not being rushed all the time. What you are communicating to people around you is that you're the guy in charge. You're the guy in control. So try this next time. That you go into maybe a restaurant and see if you can identify the manager. Typically, that is not the person who is running around as fast as he can collecting, the busboy collecting plates and silverware and whatever off tables. That's not the manager. It's not the waitress or the waiter who are running around trying to serve people as fast as they possibly can, but the guy who's taking his time and just kind of making sure everything is in order is the manager. Because really, that's good management. You got to slow down so you can pay attention to what's going on. And so when you just take your time, and again, we're not talking about being obnoxiously slow, but just take your time. As an Asperger's person, Aspergian, I guess is a better term than Asperger's person. But as an Aspergian, people automatically see that you're just a little bit strange. But if you slow down, take your time, think, some of that, not masked, but some of that will ultimately morph into a better, more positive, more effective you. Something to work on. Number 6 is this. Understand that being friendly betrays confidence. Now that is kind of counterintuition. Typically, we think the guy who betrays or reveals confidence is the guy who flexes his muscle and kind of stomps around and tries to act like a bad guy. Do you know why people do that? It's because they are sending a signal to potential threats that they're not going to be messed with. In other words, they feel threatened. But when somebody is friendly, they don't feel threatened, do they? I mean, think of the people that you are friendly to. Do you feel threatened by those people? Not generally. Think about the people who are friendly with you. Do they feel threatened by you? Probably not. There may be some exceptions, but by and large, when you are friendly with people, you are demonstrating that you're friendly, that you're not afraid, that you are in control. So, as a person with Asperger syndrome, when we are friendly to people, and you don't even have to talk to them, just smile. Maybe give them a thumbs up or wave. Just communicate that you're a friendly person. What you're doing is you are communicating that you are a confident person who is in control. Well, don't mask with that, but be that. Become that person who is just, make it a part of your life. Become that person who is just naturally friendly. And yeah, you can overdo anything. You can be flat out silly with this, and that's not what we're talking about. But just be friendly and confident. Because, reiterating what we just said, but friendliness reveals confidence. Number 7 is this, and this is one that I like to talk about all the time. See the world, and this is our last point here, but this is so important. See the world as your laboratory. Now, this is going to sound kind of rude and crude, but it's applicable. But see other people as lab rats. I don't mean that in a demeaning sense, but see other people as, an opportunity, as we mentioned earlier, to practice. So they're, in a positive sense, they're your lab rats. They're opportunities to rehearse, to practice. See the world as your laboratory. Now, you don't even have to participate. You can just sit back and observe. Obviously, you want to do both, or I think that should be obvious. But just watch how people behave. Watch how people talk. Notice when you see somebody that is very confident, likable, what is it about that person that makes them appear to be confident? What is it that makes them appear to be likable? What is it about them that attract you to them? What is that? Now, I know some people just have natural charisma. And I guess there's a spectrum where one guy on one end of the spectrum is extremely charismatic, and the guy on the other end is just flat out repulsive. And people with Asperger syndrome tend to be on that, toward the repulsive end, because we just don't behave like everybody else. But we can watch, and as you watch how people behave, understanding that this is your laboratory, your job is to observe and learn. And just think, this guy that you see wherever you're out and about, maybe it's work, school. We can go back to the grocery if you want to. Those people that you see, think to yourself, where is this person on the charismatic spectrum? If it's 1 to 100, is this guy, in the 90s, very charismatic? Is he in the 80s? Pretty charismatic and not extremely so. Maybe he or she is somewhere in the middle. Then ask yourself, where are you on that spectrum, and how can you move up? Now, you may, I say may not. Speaking for myself, I will never be extremely charismatic. I just don't have the natural capability, just like I will never, ever, ever be a professional basketball player. I just don't have it, but I can improve my game a little bit. I can always improve, and I do that by watching, by observing, because the world is my laboratory. But while you're out there in your laboratory, you know what else you got to do besides observe? You got to do some tests. Got to do some testing, yeah. So you got to practice playing basketball using that analogy. But when you're in your life's laboratory, which I've had mine going on 70 years, and I've learned a lot. That's why I do these videos. I like to share with people some of those things that I have learned, not only from observing others, but from reading and studying and whatnot. But as you're in your laboratory, practice. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. Practice talking to people. Practice presenting yourself with confidence. Practice Practice not masking and covering up your Asperger syndrome, because I discourage people from doing that. By and large, I mean, there's sometimes when that's appropriate, but by and large, just be yourself. And what is more confident than somebody who is just being themselves? Somebody who, quite frankly, just doesn't give a flip what everybody thinks. Do you see those rectangles on your screen now? If you would click on one of those, this can just keep going on and on because we have so many video presentations. You're not going to want to miss any of them. So it doesn't end when the video ends. It ends when you say it ends.